right, well, we've had two very thought-provoking presentations, and I'd now like to ask our two discussants, who is Roz, who's sitting on my right, and Mike, who's at my far left. I'm going to ask Mike to go first. Mike Wishart is the Associate Director of Collaboration and Partnering at World Vision. And prior to joining World Vision, Mike worked with the Church Mission Society for 5 years in Tanzania as the Deputy Director of Development, after a number of years of working in the private sector. Mike, I think like Sean, originally trained as an engineer, is that right? But he also holds an MBA, so he has a wealth of experience and different perspectives to bring to this. So Mike, I'm going to ask you for your comments on the presentations and any observations from your own experience that you'd like to bring to bear.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I've got a couple of points that I think I'd like to bring that are building on some of what we've already heard, and then a few maybe touching on some of the other papers in this edition of Humanitarian Exchange that we haven't touched on. But just starting at the level of talking about partnering principles. In World Vision, we're very committed to working to these, but I think the issue that we're grappling with really is how to drive them into our partnerships, how to get beyond talking about them as kind of high-level esoteric things, but actually give tools to our staff and leaders that enable them to really make sense of them in concrete steps and what they're doing. So we've adopted the Global Humanitarian Platform Principles of Partnership, and also those that have come out of the Partnering Initiative, and are looking to try to come up with some standards or guidance statements which are solid, measurable, concrete steps that when we're working in partnership we can be looking to implement against each of those principles. And I'd welcome input from anybody who's interested in kind of having a conversation around that. One of the other pieces that we're trying to reflect is that partnerships are dynamic, and trust and relationship building take time. And so as we look at that picture, we're also wanting to think about new partnerships, growing partnerships, and establish mature partnerships, and have some realistic expectations about what we might be seeing at those different stages. But that kind of brings me to another point that we've already touched on, which is there's a lot of talk around principles of partnership. But if we take a step back and we look at external relationships or inter-organizational relationships as a whole, partnerships is one form of that, and yet we tend to use this term to cover everything. Is that helpful? Do these principles of partnership apply across the board, and to what degree? And we may have some guesses around that, but I'm not sure that we've got too many solid pieces of understanding from evidence. So one of the other things that we're trying to do in World Vision is, and we've been as guilty as anybody else in this in terms of overusing the word, is to try to come up with some fairly simple framework and language which begins to distinguish between different external relationship forms, whether that's coalitions or networks or partnerships or consortia. What are the differences? What are the pros and cons? And the reason for this isn't to, as an academic exercise or a form of management control, but rather, I believe that when we look at the outcomes and the organizations that we're looking to work with and the timescales, we need to be very clever and discerning about what form of relationship that we take, because they are different and they have different skill sets associated to them, different resources, different constraints. So again, I'd welcome a conversation around that. Maybe just going off into a couple of areas that we haven't touched on. Partnering and rapid onset emergencies was touched on in a number of areas in the papers within this edition of Humanitarian Exchange. And I wonder if we could explore one idea around this, which is essentially pre-positioning of partnerships. I'll just stick with the partnership word for now. Pre-positioning of partnerships. And this is a response to the time challenge of how are we able to be effective in response to rapid onset emergencies. So when I'm talking about pre-positioning of partnerships, and talking about organisations at a country or regional level maybe, who sit down strategically and talk about who they are, their missions, the resources and assets and competencies that they bring to the table, and begin to map that out ahead of time, possibly to the state of getting to a broad brush MOU, and seeing this as a foundation or stepping stone to be able to turn on specific partnerships or collaborations when emergencies occur. And there's places in the world and contexts where, you know, we know things are going to happen. Ruth Allen's paper in the edition of Humanitarian Exchange pointed to some success in this area in terms of Mercy Corps' experience in Pakistan. Another area to think about maybe is the kind of partners that we're talking about working with. And a lot of our conversation could be around other humanitarian organisations and NGOs and government. And we've touched on the corporate world already. And maybe there's elements of competition being introduced there in a way that wasn't there before. But corporates were introduced to us in this edition through the paper from Ellen Martin and James Darcy, beginning to explore some of those dynamics, some of those opportunities, particularly where corporates have made large investments in countries. They've got significant resources to bring to the table that can complement NGOs in terms of human resources, expertise, supply and distribution channels, and especially where we're able to have conversations with corporates where we're engaging at their core business level. So I'm not talking about accessing diminishing philanthropy pots of money. We're talking about engaging in a conversation which actually is hitting their bottom line or triple bottom line. So business continuity, for example. When we're able to access these kinds of conversations, I think the significant and strategic possibilities can open out for us. Another thought which came through reading the different papers in this edition was thinking around capacity to partner. And quite often I think we focus on the partnership itself or the role of the broker. But actually, the organisations that sit behind that partnership and who they are and their characteristics can have a very significant impact on how that partnership's able to operate. In World Vision at the moment, we're looking at changing our local level development model from one where World Vision has been a direct implementer to one where World Vision sees itself as a partner alongside local organisations or a broker in that context. And as Sean shared the picture of the two slightly mismatched sumo wrestlers, it made me think of, you know, many contexts where we're working, where World Vision's this huge machine, and we're wanting to partner with CBOs and local government and maybe local expressions of the private sector. And we're all potentially very different sizes. And sometimes the machine that sits behind the representative in a partnership can derail that partnership. So we have put together a strategy, a 5-year strategy, which basically sets out an exploration within World Vision across all of the building blocks of the organisation, from strategy, structure, systems, staff, skills, style, shared values, culture, looks at all of those and says, if we want to be an effective partner organisation, we're going to have to address lots of aspects of who we are, whether it's our financial systems, whether it's our performance management systems and KPIs, whether it's our decision making. If decision making's too slow and too far away, the collaborations we're involved with, we're not going to be an effective partner. So we've kind of set out on that journey. We don't have all the answers of what these changes might need to look like, but there's a commitment from ourselves to try to move to this place where we're more effective in partnering. So I would welcome any reflections from those in the room, those online, around any of those subjects. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to say a word or two.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Now, last but definitely not least,